I chose Breaking Convention to be the first place that I did my first talk at because obviously I'm surrounded by like-minded individuals, but also you are keen to help the planet and change the world, so good company here. So this is my introduction page. So this is the presentation and how it's going to go. I'm focusing on two different ongoing ethnographic studies that I'm doing. The first that I did for my dissertation is Hara Willow's Sound Healing Circle. And secondly, Sean Rogg's The Waldorf Project. So first we're going to go through terms, then I'm going to talk about Hara a little bit, and then what she does and how her practice came about. And then I'm going to do the same thing with Sean's project, The Waldorf Project. Talk about the findings of each, similarities, dissimilarities, but my main three themes would be the senses, perception, and relationships and power dynamics. Please ignore the bibliography because the actual bibliography is like 4 pages long, so I didn't add that in, partly because I had to change it last minute. So if you want the bibliography, please do feel free to message me and I will send it over. Okay, terms to outline. And as an anthropologist, I am trained to basically consider my identity as a human being alongside my identity as an observer. And part of this, being an ethnographer, is not only do we have multiple identities, but obviously multiple roles. And so the ethnographic method is partly my personal experience, which is auto-ethnography, looking as the observer at my individual experience, which is 2 different identities working together. But also, I'm looking at information from my companions at the time during the ceremonies, who are called the informants. This is just an anthropological term. They're not spies. I followed AQA specifications. Obviously, ethics, very rigorous. The thing was a lot of paperwork. Everyone who's contributed to this was very happy to, and everyone is going to be referred anonymously? What's the word when you have a different, like, person X? What's that called again? Pseudonym. Thank you. Feel free to just shout things out because I feel like, no, seriously, the way I think about the world in general is that we're all biological systems just experiencing information. So genuinely, if you feel like something would contribute, just shout because... Anyway, thick participation is one of my favorite things. It's a term by Turner, who talks about rituals. And thick participation is being so deeply involved in the experience that it is a literally thick atmosphere, thick environment. And so it's obviously very porous. I'll explain what porosity means in a second. Okay, so liminality. What liminality is socially? Let me just quickly find my notes on this. Sorry. The liminal space is a space that is between states. So, of course, you have the constructed reality, for example, in a station where you have the train, you have the station itself, but you have the gap, and you have to mind the gap, and you have to mind the gap, generally speaking, in society. And the thing about minding the gap is that you can fall through it, but no one really talks about exactly what that is in society. But of course, we're always going through liminal spaces. We're always going through university in a way is going through a liminal change in your persona because your role and your identities are developing and changing completely. So it's prevalent in ritual that, sorry, I can't find it. Where is it? Sorry. Anyway. Turner talks about liminality as 3 stages of being a shape, dissolving, and then reconstituting yourself. So this is also a space where thought processes inhabit. And so naturally, we are constantly reconstituting how we think and how we perceive the environment. Besides recontextualizing your identity, you're obviously recontextualizing how the identity affects the world around it. So naturally, if you change yourself, you will change the world. Simple. Not necessarily in a very obvious state, but if you are paying attention enough to the detail, even transiting through different identities really does affect just the process of social evolution. Anyway, prosody in anthropology is a concept that is an animist concept, which is by Barrett, and it's something that is considered beyond animism. So the idea that knowledge and experience in every living thing and also objects is kind of a, sorry, panicking a bit. Basically, it's about the focus shifting from intent of agency necessarily from the individual to understanding that all beings, i.e. objects, people, identities, and also the environments that change these things naturally, they are all individuals, but they're, seamlessly integrated. So, for example, where does the sand begin and the shore start? Where does the ocean begin and the shore end? That kind of thing. Also, you can think about, this is your porous structure. Your skin has pores, literally, and it is also your lining. It keeps you, it holds you in, it defines you, but it is naturally also a entangled and blended thing. So then you can also apply this to reality and also your sensory experience. So that's just, right. Okay, this is Hara. Hara is a wonderful person. She has had 25 years experience doing sound healing and is a student of the Sound Healing College. She also has combined what she's learned with her master's in transpersonal psychology and has generalized experience of religion and alternative spiritualities and techniques. She really appreciates core shamanism, but what she's kind of done is she's combined these two practices into her sound healing circle. So I was studying people in this transitory experience and considering how the people relate to one another in this setting. It uses a model of the medicine wheel and approaches 8 themes each week with practices using bhakti yoga, which is devotional yoga, singing love towards the self and deities. It was situated in the local community hall in my local town. Both qualitative and quantitative data was gathered in person and digitally, and interviews, questionnaires gave a more rounded picture of the informants and their experiences. Oh, sorry, before I go on. Another thing about this is that it was a community program that Hara runs because she desires the community to be affected in a way. So she doesn't actually do this for a job, although she gets some money towards it. She gets money to just keep it going, and that's worth mentioning, because she's very interested in human development and support networks and structure. Okay, so the Waldorf project. Sean Rogg, who is the director of all of this, and a team combined elements of many different things and has grown his vision for what it is to be in a experimental ritual over time. So there were originally elements of gastronomy, which is working with food and embodying food and ingestion, and obviously movement, dance, sensory manipulation, and emotional storytelling, and especially empathy engineering. There's 30 in his team altogether, although the core team is 10. The person who does sound, there's 2 choreographers, 7 dancers, a gastronomy team, scientists, psychologists, and historians, and they're all organically working together. So this is a very organic process whereby the community produces something that is not, it's organically grown, so it's not a structure that has been built out of anything. It's just the brainchild of these people. Okay. It's an immersive theatre experience told in chapters. Each chapter has a theme, which, as designing it, it's in an embryonic stage for the first 18 months. Then it's tested for a very long period of time afterwards before it's shown to the public. I've been to chapter 3 and chapter 4, and both were held in factory settings, and it was a fascinating experience to see how they transformed the space, but I'm not going to focus on that right now. I'm going to do that in a different talk. Anyway, so the style of this methodology, because of the nature of, it wasn't a community that I was able to interact with at the time, because it was strangers coming together into a space. So my focus on this was mainly auto-ethnography and one-on-one interviews with people who were close to me at the time. One of which being my husband, and the other which one of my best friends. Okay, so in Hara's sound healing circle, there were sound baths used frequently, but also this concept of singing into one another. Remember the concept of porosity, the idea that people have fluid boundaries? So there was people experiencing physical sensations being shifted by chanting, emotional pain being releasing, improvement of mental clarity. This wasn't just from the point of view of course, when you chant, you are setting an intention which is affecting how you emotionally perceive the reality. So naturally, you're changing your perception of reality, but also possibly reality itself. Not enough studies have been done into this, so it's... sorry, I'm losing track. Anyway, secondly, the elements of journeying were combined with transpersonal psychology elements. So, for example, there was a week for the divine feminine or the mother. And so we had transpersonal psychological experiences that were similar to what... Oh, sorry. They were very similar to how Waldorf Project happens to do thematic performances. Sorry. Thematic performances. Anyway, the last one was very interesting. In the space of just 3 weeks, meeting 2 hours, basically 6 hours in total, one of the ladies at the community meeting just decided that because the feeling of structure and the feeling of community was so strong, she just basically decided that she was going to spontaneously scream. And I don't mean just like a little bit. She lasted for like 10 minutes. And this was such an unusual situation because we'd barely known each other, but all we'd done was not even discussed our personal history, just literally started chanting to Shiva and Vishnu and all sorts. Anyway, so it's a social context of unusual expression. The specific findings of the Waldorf Project, sorry. Okay, so the materials in the Waldorf Project were specifically constructed so that you would be taken out of an inward-looking focus to sensorially look outwards of yourself. And the elements of gastronomy, the feeling of the textures of the food, also the light and sound facilitates the alternative environment that participants found themselves in. Do bear in mind this is a space where dancers will be working with you, so you are very much part of the performance. So they work with your personality and they work with what you were comfortable in a totally non-verbal space because it was so loud with sound and creative movement all going around, that it was very, very impactful, very, very opposite in a way to the chanting community thing because, of course, that was very internal focus, whereas this is very external focus. Anyway, I found that I constantly, because of being buffeted around constantly, I had to re-alter and navigate my perception constantly. Anything that was a reference point, being in this unstructured environment, going back to Turner, where we have structure and anti-structured environments. basically you have to self-assess constantly, and you do it in a space without worrying, which is very unusual. Also, the last thing, socially, Informant M and myself, we had a very strange dynamic before we went to the Waldorf practice project, whereby just the power dynamics weren't balanced. However, whenever we went into Futuro, which had the theme of motherhood, we had a non-verbal relationship for the process of the ceremony, performance rather, sorry, which lasted just for that duration. But there was a section where there were walking around with whips, and they were holding people up in empowered positions, so they were literally pulling people about, pushing their heads down. And there was a moment where she dragged me out in front of the whole group and just held my head up, and I couldn't move, and it wasn't painful. I was in a very safe, it was just very passionate, and I was okay with it at the time, as you could tell. But she held my friend below me until he emotionally was receptive to this new dynamic, and she held me up. And when she noticed that I was emotionally receptive to this new change, then she let go. It wasn't in any other situation where this could have happened so fluidly, and just organically, really, because you can't just do that in society, it's mental. Right, differences. So the sound healing circle is all about verbalized intellectual processes. But it's not about what is explained in the Waldorf project, and it's about, I actually can't read the red. Can you read the red? Good, just checking. I think it's probably just where I'm an idiot, I could read this. So one of the things that's really interesting is the sound healing circle is ingesting sound in a similar way to the Waldorf project ingesting food. And when I mean ingesting food, by the way, with the Waldorf project, they literally sprayed it all over you so that you are sensorially absorbing it into your skin, and you're feeling the effect of the sound in the sound healing circle literally soak into your skin as well with the practices. But the main points I want to pick up here, sound healing circle, practices are intended to be repeated as helpful tools you engineer yourself and your own structure. It's not like a religious system whereby you go to an ashram and then it's just, this is what we do. It's literally about strengthening your bone structure, pretty much. And the Waldorf project is kind of, I mean metaphorically, obviously. And the Waldorf project is about, it's not really experience that is meant to be repeated because it's a safe surprise, is the phrase that I wrote here, of empathy engineering that is from the outside onto you. I could talk about Foucault here, but I won't because I don't think I've got time. Can't tell. Anyway, so this is education as a byproduct of experience, but this is experience as a byproduct of education. And I think that we need to have community spaces, thanks, we need to have community spaces that are going to facilitate this sort of community structure in a post-secular world that we now live in, where we've got pubs and we've got schools and hospitals and things, but we have community halls that get changed into things, but it's always liminal spaces, and that reflects upon society. You know, the liminal spaces within society, Waldorf project, abandoned factories and spaces like that being used. And then the sound healing circles, she's just finding any old room, really, to do that in. I think we could make an effort as a community to try and fund this sort of thing. So it's a holistic approach to human experience. The therapeutic models achieve the same similar effects with different ways of getting there. So you're kind of, Hara talks a lot about the, you know, with journeying, you have above, below, before, behind, within, without, and then all the spaces you can go. It's sort of, she, basically, both of these practices balance and re-center your senses, which is what I think Ingold calls it recentering the senses or something like that, because we take too much, we have too much cultural context on our senses to actually perceive anything to begin with. As part of the scientific process, anthropology sits at the very, very beginning, but the scientists don't actually notice that everyone's doing anthropology just badly. Because if you perceive things, then you go, oh, we need to study that and do the tests and other scientific processes to actually discover if things are, scientifically provable. You're doing anthropology in this bit here because you're observing things and looking at the theories of how. So it's not actually anthropology as a subject by itself. It's a much more enmeshed and integrated way of why do we have all of these different psychology, anthropology? And then there's arguments and of which is better. Archaeology, like I've had like 20 people this week tell me that I have to tell people that anthropology is not a subject. It is a subject that is very much more enmeshed with everything else than it just annoys me that science doesn't acknowledge the use of anthropology. And I'll talk about that more in a different thing because I don't really have time. Anyway. Similarities fell into key elements: the sensory, prosody, edibility approach, and material anthropology. So the ideas of Daniel Miller, which would be most prevalent in his books, Stuff, and also Materialities. Material objects have, in material culture studies and also materiality, we have a very human-centered way of observing reality. And if we shift our gaze to look at things possibly from a materials perspective or a biological, like plant perspective, then we are going to look at things in a different dynamic and use our senses in a different way that is not so centered on the human perception to then possibly broaden our ability to perceive reality, and then we can take drugs and things on top of that. Anyway, it's about basically having a good base so the drugs can work with you. Before you can't just be a blank base, because whatever drugs you take are going to be working with what you've already got. So why not educate what you've already got, doing things like this? Anyway, I was going to talk about Spinoza and how the Atman. Basically, short version, Spinoza's concept of God is one, God is everything, and that is the state of reality. And everything is individuated basically into individuals that are simultaneously one and also themselves. This kind of practice, I noticed, I started thinking of everybody else in the community, both in Hara's sound healing therapy and also in the Waldorf project. You stop, because you're so empathetically engaged and involved, you can't work out which emotions are necessarily yours if you're a very highly empathetic person. So I wouldn't be surprised if we could do some studies on this scientifically, and because it's like being sensorily psychic. It's a bit weird. Anyway, relationships, power dynamic perspective, kinship and anthropology. Haraway talks about in this age of, oh, come on, I've forgotten what it's called. Sorry. The Anthropocene. She has a paper called Anthropocene, Capitalocene, and Cthulhucene, Making Kin. Now, we are recognizing that kinship is developed through communities, going through rituals, changing identities, getting married, becoming social figures, relational figures, and these are all different ways of making kin. But the point is they're exchanges of power and agency as well. And I don't have time now, because I've just been told I've got 5 minutes. So please do go and look at Foucault and exchanges of power and agency. Conclusion. Don't really have time for most of this now, unfortunately, but I would consider that No, I need to find this for this. Give me a sec. I will put it as part of the bibliography if people would like to find it, but the internet's just gone, so I can't access it. Basically, there is the capacity for this kind of work to help people have a sensory, embodied approach to perceiving reality, which would be an antidote to binary, polarized perception. Yes, Cartesian dualism is a thing, but the point is that we haven't worked out how to solve Cartesian dualism because our minds are too enmeshed with binary thinking. So, yeah, basically, I would suggest people also watch Mark Schumann's talk, I can't remember how to pronounce his name, and Danny Nemo's talk that were on today as just to compare with this talk because they talk very similarly about ritual and community practice.
Sorry, could you just say when they are on?
They'll be on YouTube now because they've just happened.
Can you say the name again?
Danny Nemu, I don't know how to pronounce his name, and Mark, but I can't pronounce. Schooneman. All right, cool. I was right the first time, then fine. That's me. Sorry for doing an awful job. Anyway, if you want the bibliography of the things I actually talked about, and then also the bibliography of the things I was intending to talk about before I had to change it last night, please do message me. So, yeah, that's not it. Okay.